All right, you guys, we're meeting with Abraham Ritchie, who's clearly one of my top art critics in Chicago, because I try to think of who the others are. You know, Abraham, you and I were talking recently, but I like this notion. You know, you seem to indicate that when you were in high school, or at least in college, you had some inkling that writing about art was something you wanted to do. Is that correct? Can you hear me, Abraham?
Yeah. There's some digital feedback, so if you can just repeat your question really quick, that'd be great.
When did you realize you wanted to write about art?
Yeah, as far as that conversation went, I don't know if it was really when I realized I wanted to write about art, but I ended up writing my college entry exam on a Bruce Nauman piece that I saw at the Centre Pompidou in France. So that was really sort of a, I don't know, sort of a omen of what was to come in a good way, I guess. So that was one of the first moments when I really had a powerful experience with culture, with art, and really sort of it stuck with me, and I really thought about it, and still to this day continue to think about that sort of encounter and that experience and how powerful that was. So that was sort of, what's that?
Have you gone back and read your college essay since then?
You know, I'd like to. I don't know if I can find it though. It was, you know, on one of the old Macs that ended up getting trashed. So.
Yeah. So are you pretty much living your dream?
I mean, I think that I'm definitely. I don't know if it's quite there yet, but I mean, I don't have any regrets. I worked in retail in high school, and you know, I sort of decided at that point that I was not going to get into a work situation that I didn't really enjoy, or really, you know, that I was only doing for some sort of, you know, paltry income, and my heart really wasn't in it. So at that point, I sort of made the decision to go with what I really wanted to do and what got me, you know, fired up intellectually and emotionally, and beyond that even. So.
You said that you have a straight job of being an art handler at the Art Institute. What do you think? What's the relationship? And I'm wondering how other artists can extrapolate between their straight job. I've come up with an opinion recently that's taken me a decade. Is there a relationship between your straight job and your writing? Does the straight job serve your chosen job?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, if by the fact that I'm always around artwork and always, you know, being, you know, creatively stimulated by artwork, you know, I think it's pretty crucial to be constantly involved with culture and being around culture, and that was really something that I took pretty seriously, and has dictated a lot of my, you know, job choices that I've made. Just because I think like if I was, you know, again, you know, doing retail or something like that, I think I'd be around, you know, different types of people who weren't interested in the same thing I was, and I think that being around, you know, the artwork itself is important, but also a group of, you know, other individuals who have interests that are different from yourself, but are still, you know, very strongly interested in art and very committed to being there, because it's not like, you know, these jobs are extremely high paying. So everybody is there for a very particular reason and is dedicated to being there for that reason.
When you talk about being immersed in culture, do you mean that, or do you mean just visual art? I mean, do you go to theater? Do you go to opera? Do you go to foreign movies with subtitles?
the whole cliche 9 yards. No, no, I do mean that very seriously. I do. I think that I'm most interested. Well, I know I'm most interested in visual arts in and of itself. I've really, actually, it's funny you mentioned opera, because I've really been trying to get a taste and appreciation for opera going, and it's been very hard. something that I'm having a hard time getting into. I can respect it as a cultural form, but
you and me
not my
both.
thing.
And it also costs a fair amount of money. It's not that they have that many visual art critics night at the opera.
Yeah, exactly. But no, as far as like the live music thing goes, you know, I'm very interested in classical music and contemporary classical music, and then you know, of course, I consider you know, rock music, hip hop, all of that to be just as culturally important as classical or anything else.
So you write for ArtSlant, right?
Yeah, I write for ArtSlant. I write for Flavor Pill. I write for NewCity occasionally, but I haven't really recently. So,
and go ahead. Do you feel like how is it determined what you're going to be writing about?
Well, those are all right now. I mean, those are all web venues for writing. So it doesn't really determine in really any way what I write about, because you know, my own interests will always sort of determine what the content is. It sort of determines, it does determine how it's written and what I can include in different things, because you know, writing for the web, you can obviously do different things than you can writing in paper. You don't have to rely on description. You can do images, you can include video, you can link to other websites. It's really become sort of my medium of choice, since it's so flexible in that way, and there's a lot of potential there, I think. So I think that's it's not so much what I write on, but how and the sort of the form that it takes.
Who chooses the assignments?
I do. Yeah.
I don't think that's normal for most art critics and most art publications. Do you agree?
I think it, you know, places like Art Forum, Art in America, it's definitely not. I mean, I'm also the editor at these places too, so you know, it's really, there's a level of trust there, and there's a level of understanding that, you know, I have the responsibility to select certain things. And there's really never been sort of a question. I mean, I'm totally open to suggestion about covering things, because I think that, you know, it shouldn't be always one person's agenda or preference of what they like or anything like that. So
in the last week, Hilton Kramer died. And Hilton Kramer was a very significant art critic. Almost seems insufficient to call him an art critic, maybe an art postulator. You know, philosopher, didactic. But the point that I'm going for is that he had a really particular point of view, which I thought was kind of restrained and conservative. Do you have a particular point of view? Is there something discernible if we read half a dozen of your essays that one might be able to surmise about who you are and what your point of view is?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I don't try to have, I don't try to have a particular agenda like, you know, perhaps Clement Greenberg did, with advocating, you know, one type of art at the expense of others and over others.
Right.
That's really important to have an open approach to art, and I think that that's actually sort of my main platform really for approaching art, is to be open to whatever the experience is and not try to pigeonhole, you know, what art should be or what art isn't or something like that. Within that, there are definitely different art forms that I'm very interested in, and you know, very, very much different artists that I'm interested in as well, and different, you know, sort of ideas. You know, I'm very interested in continuing ideas of modernism and that sort of thing. And then at the same time, I'm also very interested in getting much more recognition for things like street art or, you know, sort of different forms of sculpture that are going out in public, sort of anonymously and unrecognized, as well as you know, social practice work too as well. So, so I mean, there's a broad spectrum of things. I'm definitely not interested in just one thing over others.
How do you find out about art you might want to write about?
I stayed pretty active, going out to see things. I mean, I think it's just going out and seeing things in the galleries, as well as, I mean, reading pretty much everything that I can possibly get my hands on. I think that that's, you know, extremely important if you're an artist, or, you know, and especially if you're writing about art, you need to be familiar with everything that's going on. You need to be aware of what other people are writing about. You need to be aware of you know, what your peers and what your colleagues are talking about. You know, who they're talking about, who they think is good, whether or not you agree with it. I mean, I think that this is pretty much the standard way that most people sort of, you know, stay in touch at, you know, looking at, you know, constantly, you know, investigating different things on the internet, you know, looking at reviews from other cities, you know, looking through magazines, all that sort of stuff. Just trying to get as much information as possible all the time.
So do you go to look at art every week?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, yeah.
Just some guideline that says I need to publish this article within X period of time from the opening or before the closing?
No, I really don't. I do have like a certain set amount of pieces that are due for one venue that are due per week. You know, so that's somewhat of a motivator. But I mean, you know, there's also, you know, when you have your colleagues that are always going out to exhibitions and everything, you know, there's a social factor to that. There's also, you know, just a real curiosity and an interest to what's being shown, what's being created, you know, how it's all going to come together.
Do you try to pay attention to what's going on in other cities in the country too, to see how Chicago relates to that?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's a big mistake to not do that. And I mean, not just other cities in the country, but, you know, really all over the world, and trying to get that feeling of what's going on, and, you know, in a city in South America, or what's going on over in China somewhere, at, you know, these incredible, you know, cities that are home to just thousands and thousands of artists. I mean, I think that it's, you know, it's impossible at some level, but I think it's still nonetheless very important to stay up to date, and at least try to be aware of all of that. Because if you don't, it ultimately will come back to you, I think.
So let's talk about Chicago in relationship to the rest of the world for a moment. I would have to say that there's not a lot of things that are particularly special about our art scene, and a lot of cities feel like they deserve more attention. I think that what's particularly true in Chicago is that there's a work ethic here, and that people tend to make well-made work or well-endeavored work, or they spent a lot of time trying to have it be executed well, which I think comes from a work ethic that is pervasive in Chicago. So to an extent, do you agree with my assessment? But to a larger extent, what do you see in terms of Chicago and how it relates to New York and other parts of the universe?
I've heard your assessment before. You know, it comes out in your writing. Yeah, I mean, I think to some degree, I agree, and to another, I don't. I think one thing that Chicago definitely has is that there's a lot of people who are very sincere about their work, who believe in it a lot. I think there's sort of a lack of irony that's much more prevalent on the East Coast, and I think that I think that sometimes that's both an asset and a hindrance, because irony can be cool at some point. But ultimately, I think that it's an asset to be honest, to be down to earth about work. I think that a lot of people too really are motivated to make their work, and really, like I said, believe in it strongly, because there are very few artists that are able to make their work full time here and just do that. There are many people that are, getting into the studio after their 9 to 5. They're getting, into the studio on weekends. So I think that there are that's a lot of it too. There's a very strong personal commitment to artists and to their work. Not that there isn't elsewhere per se, maybe, but here I think it's especially strong.
Okay, cool. Where do you see your writing going in the years ahead? I mean, are you happy in the future working for these 2 publications, or there should be more?
No, I mean, I definitely want to branch out to other things. I mean, I think that the main problem is sort of the industry itself, as far as criticism and writing goes. I mean, we've seen, both of Chicago's major daily newspapers go bankrupt. They've really, the Sun-Times has essentially no visual arts coverage. The Chicago Tribune has no actual art critic, like, sort of, as part of the official editorial structure of the paper. I think recently they've hired Lori Waxman to write for them, which is good. But I mean, this is sort of mirroring what's happening all over the country. Is this, San Francisco fired their art critic. I mean, we've seen a definite decline in these types of positions, and I think that that's a real problem for people like me that would sort of love to do that, and would make a big commitment, but also to the artists, because they're not getting their work discussed in a serious way. They're not getting their work represented to local populations. Local populations, in turn, are being underserved and are not being, given ideas about culture, being shown who the artists are in their own cities. So I think it's a huge problem, and I think that I've worked with, when I was living in Wisconsin, I was working with Madison Newspapers Incorporated, and they operated the 2 daily newspapers in Madison and in Madison, Wisconsin, and they were really interested in doing cultural coverage. They were really quick to pick up on online opportunities for media, but it's been sort of very surprising to me that hasn't happened in Chicago, and in a lot of ways it seems like the Chicago medias are so attached to their idea as a newspaper that they fail to see beyond into other realms of media. So
I think that's definitely
I'd like to branch. Yeah, but I'm also very happy, really improving what it is I do, and building up my staff, and trying to drive conversation, and really focus on driving cultural conversation and building that kind of cultural conversation, because I don't think that leadership is going to come from the 2 major dailies. Try as Lori might, they've made it.
Lori does a good job, but I think she's sort of hindered.
Yeah. Well, I mean, they've made it abundantly clear that that's not where they're, they want to pay it lip service, and they want to do big splashy graphics, but as far as the serious coverage goes, they're not really interested.
That's agreed. Why don't we open this up to some questions in a moment? And while you guys are getting your hands up, what's the deal with? I mean, how many? You must have a handful of favorite artists, and how much can you promote them or write about them before you feel like it's what's your attitude?
My attitude towards that sort of thing is, I mean, I do definitely have artists that I'm interested in, but I don't think, I mean, we read critics because they write about artists that they're interested in, and they make an argument or a case for why that work is interesting, you know, why that work is important in a larger context. I mean, I really see criticism as not, you know, I think the idea of it being objective is a complete myth. I think that critics are always talking about, you know, their own personal take on things, you know, what they think is better than something else. You know, but by the same token, I don't think, like, I'm not writing on somebody every single week or anything. I mean, these things come around maybe every 6 months or something like that. So it's like, you know, I don't really feel like I'm, you know, writing excessively about any one person at the expense of other things. And I think that also there's a lot of good artists. So I mean, it's not really, you know, you can spread around all the coverage that you want and still talk about, you know, artwork that you believe in, that you believe needs more support, that you want to provide a larger understanding for it. So it's never really, I don't know, I've never felt any qualms about anything, and I don't think that I've ever written excessively about any one person or anything. So,
how do you feel about being the recipient of art as gifts?
you know, it's never really come up. So. I mean, I don't know. If it came up, it would be an odd conversation to have. I don't really think that it's you know, entirely appropriate, just since it's something you're giving for free. I think that buying artwork is, you know, more important, because I don't think that as a critic you should give up, you know, your right to own artwork, or your right to buy artwork, or your right to be around, you know, beautiful things that you enjoy. But yeah, I don't know. I don't think that.
I was reading a guide by some other critic, artist person, and his attitude was that he wouldn't accept any gifts of artwork from artists he didn't already own. And I thought that seemed like a fairly pragmatic guide, not that I adhere to it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that might make sense. I don't know. I don't really. It's never really come up, I guess. So.
Okay, cool. Corbin, go ahead, Corbin.
Okay. Hi, Abraham. Thanks a lot. First, I was just going to ask you a quick question. Who's your favorite critic? And I thought, well, do you have a mentor, living or dead? And then I thought, do you consider yourself part of a certain lineage of looking, critiquing, thinking? You might have already answered this. I know you mentioned Clement Greenberg, and I didn't know that Hilton Kramer just died, but I know you said you wanted to sort of continue the conversation about modernism.
Go back to the first part of those questions, Corbin, and ask those over again, because those are the most interesting. And then I'm going to mute you because there's an echo that you're creating. So go ahead and do the first things you said. Let's focus on those.
Who is your favorite critic, living or dead? Do you feel like you have a mentor, and do you feel like you're part of a lineage of criticism?
Great, thank you. I'm muting you. Go ahead, Abraham.
Yeah, thanks. That is a good question. I have to say, I do think for everything that I, you know, sort of disagree with, I think, you know, was an oversight or what have you. I do really think that Clement Greenberg is probably one of my favorite critics, if not definitely my favorite critic. I shouldn't really beat around the bush, I guess. But I do think there are a lot of flaws to his approach. But I do think there was a really interesting, there's something really interesting there that he was doing, which was, you know, sort of a unabashed creation of a cultural platform for understanding a particular kind of artwork and a particular kind of painting. And I think that, you know, I think that that's lasted for decades now, even if everybody tries to discount it, or, you know, writes an essay that's like, you know, this is why he's wrong, we're moved on. You know, I think that he's definitely one of the giants that you can't, especially in modern art, that you can't really discount, even if you want to. I think that, you know, the more we try to get past it, the larger those sorts of ideas about art remain with us. So I think that he's definitely a favorite critic of mine. As far as the tradition that I see myself in, I don't really, you know, I guess sort of by default, everybody who calls himself a critic, who tries to act in this, you know, in this role, in this mode, is part of a larger tradition of criticism. But I think too, it's also, you know, and Jim Elkins has written about this, you know, pretty extensively. He sees it as a problem that there's a sort of, you know, there's no structure to criticism, that there's no, you know, there's no discipline essentially that you can look to and point to. I think that that's a big asset, because, you know, each person coming into it, you know, it's not like they're issued like a license or something like that, but they're allowed to define the role for themselves. They're allowed to define their boundaries for themselves. They're allowed to define the practice for themselves. And I think that it then becomes up to you as to what you want to accomplish, and as what your goals are, what kind of conversation you want to create. So I perceive the discipline to be very open-ended, and I think that that's an asset for it. And then as far as mentors, I don't think that I really have a mentor. I think that everybody that, you know, a lot of the criticism that I read is really sort of takes on that role. I think there are more, you know, influences, you know, like Greenberg. I've read a lot of Hilton Kramer's stuff. I don't agree with any of it, basically. You know, I think that these are all, I think that, you know, I when I was starting writing, I actually asked, you know, somebody that I respected, you know, very, very much for some advice, and her advice was that, you know, she wasn't going to tell me, and that, you know, I should find it out for myself, and I should find my own way. And it turned out to be that was very, that was very good advice, is to, you know, sort of do it yourself, and then, you know, just staying up to date on everybody else's writing is really being a mentor for yourself. So I think that that's sort of it. But also by that sense too, I do have, you know, a group of colleagues, a group of you know, of writers that I do, you know, talk with regularly, that, you know, we exchange ideas regularly. I consider my writing staff as well in that too. We all, you know, exchange ideas. So, so I mean, I think it's very important to have, you know, sort of an intellectual circle that you can connect with. So, I think that's all the questions.
Oh, thanks a lot. I was just going to quickly ask, what about people like Rosalind Krauss or Lucy Lepard, or?
Oh, yeah.
You don't have to answer that. I just was thinking, you know.
Oh, no, I know. I mean, I was just going on a short list. Like, I love art theory. I think art theory is incredibly important. I've read, you know, I love all of them. Linda Nochlin would actually be another one that I would count in my top 3 influences, especially, you know, her very strong feminist take on historical art, and that sort of sort of revisiting history through a certain cultural critical lens, I think is incredibly important. And yeah, I mean, I could go off of the list. I mean, but yeah, I think that it's very important to stay up, especially on art history. I think Rosalind Krauss gets a little bit dry for me sometimes, but you know, there are always great ideas there. And I think that that's ultimately really what I'm always looking for, is, you know, bringing out new ideas, connecting art to ideas, and making an understanding for an artwork.
Thank you very much. Thanks a lot.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think you're on mute.
Yeah, Paul, you're on mute.
That's because I was yelling at the dog. Okay, sorry. Let's go back to Sam. Sam, go ahead.
Is that for me?
Sam, your turn.
Okay, great. Yeah, Abraham, I just have a question. Do you feel that the way things have been going in the art world with these, you know, enormous prices and, you know, the unregulated, quote-unquote, nature of the art world, has it affected art criticisms in any way?
That's a good question. You know, you would think with all the money that's going on, there would be more art criticism, that there would be more, you know, writing about that these sorts of opportunities would expand, but that's really not the case. I think that I was listening into your all's previous conversation about Damien Hirst, and just to, you know, bring that up as example, related to your question, Sam, I do think that now art criticism is being used to underwrite and to, you know, lend cultural capital and lend, you know, an air of authority to artwork, and to sort of buttress it up. And I think that that's a big problem. You know, there's been, you know, a lot of there's been writing about these publishing houses that will, you know, essentially use criticism and use, you know, theory to you know, undergird these types of artworks that they're financially interested in. And then I think, too, there are a lot of people that are concerned about sort of the payments and all that goes on for catalog entries, that goes on for you know, like, you know, private catalogs and private writing, and I think that some of that concern's pretty well founded in some ways, and in some ways, you know, maybe not so much. You know, like I was reading in an art forum a few months ago about a critic that was talking about how he was flying in Gagosian's private jet or something like that, and I mean, that's just, you know, that's a pretty, you know, clear case of somebody that's being influenced by powerful galleries, by you know, that sort of moneyed lifestyle. So yeah, I think that there are some problems there.
But you still do catalog essays, don't you?
Yeah, I mean, every once in a while. My personal, I mean, it's not like I really seek them out. It's more just sort of, I mean, I've only really done a few. It's just people that find me, really. But I mean, I think it's pretty clear that, you know, what's going on in a catalog essay is that somebody's being paid to write an essay, and that's, you know, always pretty clear. But personally, I feel like I would have to have an interest in the art to begin with to write about it. I can't imagine writing something that I wasn't at all personally interested in. And you know, I feel that it's pretty clear what's happening in catalog essays. But when you're talking about, you know, like Dave Hickey getting paid, you know, $20,000 to write, you know, a single a single essay for Jeff Koons catalog, you know. That's quite a lot of money. So I think it gets tricky when you talk about, like, you know, very significant numbers like that.
Got it. Okay, cool. Monica, your turn. Go ahead, Monica.
Thanks. You mentioned supporting artists.
Louder, please be louder, okay?
Okay, I'll come closer. You mentioned supporting artists by spreading the word and fostering an understanding of their work. Do you also see your job as setting standards? And if so, how or what are your standards? And I have
yeah, I mean, as far as setting standards, I think that that's sort of an implicit act or an implicit afterthought or effect of writing. Like, there are certain standards that I have, I guess. I don't know if I would use the word standards, though, because that I feel like I would probably use a word like quality instead of standard. If there, you know, I want something that is of high quality, and I do think that there is, you know, a definite manifestation of quality in an artwork, even, you know, that's exterior to form. So even if it's, you know, a very slight sculpture or something like that, there has to be that, you know, that thought, that that conceptualization behind it, or there has to be, you know, something else, like, you know, Paul is talking about craft or something like that. Like, I do think that there is a factor of quality that I'm always looking for, and I think that that would probably relate to my standards. Wouldn't want to say that I'm, you know, trying to set a standard that, you know, acts as a fence to other things, but I do think that there are things that I'm not interested in because I don't perceive them to be as high quality in the long run as other things. And this also has to go with, you know, what I want to do with my criticism. I don't think that, you know, I'm really interested in looking at the short term. I'm very interested in looking at art in a long perspective and in the long term. And that's not all art, and that's not all artists. So there's a lot that falls, you know, that I don't write about, and that falls outside of my my interest in that way.
Let's talk about something for a moment. You and I both saw an exhibit together on Saturday at this small little gallery in Chicago with the optimistic name of Believe In, and in is with two N's. And what is it we both liked about this so much? I mean, I thought it was one of the best works of art I've seen this year. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I thought it was really good. I see a lot of really, what I liked about it was it had a lot of elements that I was interested in. It had, you know, it presented, I guess I should describe it first because, you know, nobody knows what we're talking about. Essentially, it was a multimedia presentation of.
Can you see it now? Everything got quiet. Abraham, I froze you, I think.
No, I'm still here.
Okay.
I don't know I don't know if you're trying to share a link or something like that.
I was trying to share the desktop, and the image of the piece that we saw should be up.
Oh, okay. Well, essentially, it was like a really, you know, very, very multimedia type of work that had a lot of little sculptural elements. And then it had an accompanying music soundtrack that was, you know, sort of original music by the artist and one of his friends. And then it was all overlaid with a digital projection over the top that added an element of that added motion to everything. I mean, what I liked about it was that, you know, it was very cross-genre, that it was, you know, that it went across those traditional borders and did succeed in making something new out of that. And it went for the, you know, it really went for the total art experience. And I think it succeeded in that. And it, you know, I think that it also had a presentation of sort of a revision of society that I'm very interested in as well. I think that it showed, you know, possibilities for living in a city, for living in a community that were very, you know, positive and optimistic, without being cliche, but being very honest. And I think maybe this has to do with, you know, maybe Chicago or something like that. It also had things that I'm naturally interested in. It had a very strong street art feel. You know, I know the artist from some of his graffiti work as well, but it was also, you know, really impeccably done with its digital component. And I see a lot of art that's really not completely done, and it's a difficult thing to do, to get a digital projection onto a three-dimensional sculptural sort of backdrop. So the fact that it was done that well was, you know, was very impressive, was very thoughtful, and extremely, I mean, it did have a strong element of beauty, which I'm very interested in. So, I mean, I think that it had a lot of elements in play, including sort of a cross-section of, you know, artistic practices, you know, music, film, digital, sculpture, painting, drawing, and created something new out of that. And I think that that's really interesting. I don't know. That's what I liked about it.
Me too. I thought it was really fresh, different, accessible, and really well done. Are you going to write about this as by itself, or are you going to try and integrate it with some other context?
I don't know. I haven't really decided. I already wrote a quick piece about it on one of my on the Flavorfill website. I'm not sure if it's public yet, but I already wrote a quick a short little piece on it. So, but it's one of those pieces that'll stick with you, I think, too, and that you'll keep on thinking about. I know I will. So, I mean, I'm sure it will resurface.
The only problem I had was that I think there's 5 artists that are involved in creating it, and I only know who one of them is.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I guess that's not really a problem for me, since I'm just thinking about the work as a singularity. So.
Yeah, I'd like to be able to pay attention to each of these individuals more. So I don't know, you know, or the group. But I thought it was really good. All right, let's go back to questions. Joyce, did you have a question?
I did. I have 2 questions, and they are, Abraham, who do you write for? I keep thinking of Art Forum, which is so obtuse and almost another language. I understand writing for the internet is a completely different experience, but I'm just curious as to whether you have a dialogue with yourself as to how dry or philosophical to make a reading.
So when you say who he writes for, you don't mean the name of the publication. You mean, are you writing for the viewer? Are you writing for yourself? Are you writing for your girlfriend?
Or other critics?
Sure.
That's one question. And the other one is, why isn't Chicago more interested in visual art? Is that the problem with, again, the audience? Is it so that Chicago's really not interested in that, or is it strictly the publication?
Well, I think to answer the first question, I think I write for a variety of audiences and for sort of different levels of understanding. I don't really set. I don't really always write for just one set. Sort of, I think the subtext of the question is how you know, how much philosophy or theory do you want to bring in? How many specialized terms do you want to bring in? I'm really not worried about bringing in those terms. I don't want to. I think it's really important that we bring in theoretical terms, that we discuss them. That there's a lot. I think that a lot of people have a lot of. I don't really understand. Sort of, and no offense, I don't understand like resistance or fear of theoretical terms that are constantly being created and innovated. I mean, these are the ways that ideas exist, and the ways that ideas continue to grow and continue to be built on. So I think it's important to discuss them, and discuss them in in understandable terms. I think the problem maybe that Joyce is talking about is jargon, and I think that that's really easy to spot, and I think that that's really easy to see, at least when I read, and really easy to call somebody out on, and I don't have a problem with that either. But I mean, I think it's important to bring that knowledge and those types of ideas that are circulating around experts or around specialists, and present them to artists and to audiences in an understandable way. And I think that can really be fun too. I mean, if you're gonna talk about relational aesthetics or something like that, you don't have to make it completely, unintelligible. You can, I mean, if you talk about it in Bourriaud's own words, like creating an atmosphere for conviviality, like you can be snarky about it and say, like, basically saying that it's all good to put up, strands of lights around the gallery and call it a day. I think that that's the opportunity. If you want to talk about theory, you can actually bring it in humorous ways, and that's how I've done it a lot, is bringing it in humorous, sort of somewhat sarcastic ways, and talking about it, but also giving it its due as a serious idea, and trying to create respect for that. As to why isn't Chicago interested in visual arts, I would disagree with that, just on its face. I think that as a city, and maybe I'm misunderstanding the question too, or maybe this isn't quite what you meant, but I think that the city is extremely interested in visual arts and in arts as a whole, and as in different types of forms. I think that going down to Millennium Park, you can see all sorts of kids interested in seeing a sculpture. They don't exactly know what it is. They don't know who Anish Kapoor is, but they love the sculpture. They know it's art. They're interested in it. I think that more and more people are getting extremely interested in art. I think that that's only going to increase over time.
No, I agree with you. I just meant in terms of coverage.
Oh yeah. Well, in terms of, sure. In terms of coverage, I mean, I have to say, I mean, I sort of made it, fairly clear of what my opinion is of the major newspapers in Chicago, and I continue to do that. I don't think they're run by people that are interested in art, or very interested in making a good paper. I think that if you look at the history of Sam Zell and what he's done, they're much more interested in making money. They're much more interested in exploiting a newspaper for the bottom line, rather than building it up and creating something. And I think ultimately it's going to lead to it's already led to bankruptcies, and the wide speculation was that he bought it so that it could lead to bankruptcy, that he bought it for the assets. So I just don't think that they're interested in creating a good product, which I think is to their detriment. I think it's to their employees' detriment. I think it's to the city's detriment. So I mean, and then those are the mainstream newspapers. So so I think it leads to a problem where the city is being underserved and the population's being underserved. I think fortunately, people recognize that and are going elsewhere, but I think it's a real problem when the general audience is not being given consistent, serious cultural coverage.
Thank you.
Sure.
Agreed. Let's go on to Sharon Gilmore. Sharon, go ahead.
Hi, Abraham. I'm curious, do you differentiate between art made by men and art made by women? And do you enter, do writing that pertains to their histories, or is that kind of passé now? Is that not?
Yeah, that's a good question. You know, I really don't at all. Like, and in fact, it's been kind of interesting because, you know, with some of the names, like it's hard to tell if it's a man or a woman. So so I've stopped using gender-specific language in my writing. But I think it comes up more I think I'll address it much more in terms of you know, what the artist wants to do and where the artist leads you. Like, you know, in Nicolene Thomas's work, who's showing at Rona Hoffman right now, obviously gender is a huge part of that. You know, the Guerrilla Girls have a survey up at Columbia College here in Chicago too. I mean, you can't talk about the Guerrilla Girls without talking about, you know, feminism, and I mean, just on its face. But by the other sense, if, you know, I think that, you know, if artists are looking at very particular aesthetic issues, then I'm looking at the aesthetics, and gender doesn't enter into it. I think it enters into it if an artist is looking at politics, if they're looking at identity issues as far as race, gender, sexuality. I think I follow the lead of the artist, where the artist goes and what the artwork does as to how to address those issues. But I think really it doesn't come up unless the artist makes it enter in that way.
Cool. All right. Let's go to Jason. Jason, your turn.
Hi, Abraham. Thanks for speaking with us. I guess I have two things. Yeah, one thing. You mentioned that you're particularly interested in graffiti art, and that's something that's really relevant for me right now. I actually just came back from New York. I was at the Armory show and the satellite shows, and something I noticed that graffiti culture and graffiti art was making a big splash in that, you know, in these art fairs. And this is something that I've kind of battled with for a while. You know, I come from a graffiti background, and I've always wanted to sort of bring graffiti into my work, and I've started to do it recently. What do you think the sustainability or the long-term effects, I guess, of graffiti culture are in the art world? You know, like, do you think that that's sort of a passing fad, or if it's the kind of thing that is a really viable and sustainable thing for an artist? You know, because
Sure.
I think it's very detrimental to be kind of put in a box and like, oh, that's a graffiti guy, you know. But I'm also very interested in bringing that into my work. So what do you think about that?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that you're probably right. Like, I think it's undeniable that, like, street art, you know, is sort of the fad of the day. I mean, I think too that it's that we've sort of watched a lot of really the authentic idea go out of graffiti art and go out, sort of the art kernel, like the real artistic innovation go out of that, particularly in, like, you know, Shepard Fairey's work, like, you know, everybody loved Banksy. Banksy all of a sudden got really big, and I think that his quality has definitely declined. I don't think that he's nearly as interesting as he was in his early work. You know, that said, I mean, there's, you know, I guess it's great that there's a renewed interest in that. Like, there's, you know, but at the same time, there was in the 80s too, you know, like, you know, there was a big graffiti show at the Renaissance Society in the 80s, and, you know, where are those folks now, you know? Some of them are getting back in, you know, to the sort of, onto the, you know, since it's big again, but, you know, I think honestly it's, I think it is, the main challenge for graffiti art is to make that transition from the street to the gallery, and that's really the huge problem, because what graffiti and street art does on the street is something completely different when it comes into the gallery. You know, you definitely lose that context, which is so crucial. So, you know, I've seen a lot of really painful shows where the artist just doesn't make that transition, or tries to make transitions to the gallery in ways that they think are, you know, sort of expected, or you know, they're changing their work to fit the gallery, and that's not quite the most productive way of going about it. You need to figure out what your work has to do with the gallery and find some way to make that meet. And I'm not really sure. You know, it sort of varies from each person to person how that transition goes. But I think that there is something very crucial that's there in art, in street art, in graffiti art. I think that, you know, there's a huge, as far as being a writer, I think that there's a huge unexplored territory, and there's a huge gap in the literature and in the understanding and in the basis for that. And actually, one of the projects that me and one of my colleagues at ArtSlant have going is sort of working on creating that. She's writing her thesis, her master's thesis on the history of graffiti art, and trying to create that sort of alternative art historical narrative that really links an art form that it was, you know, completely developed here and innovated here, and also innovated with, you know, other elements, with, you know, music, with dance, with all that sort of thing. So when you look at it, it's a very interesting sort of complete art movement that has a complete cultural set of elements to it. So I think that there's a lot of opportunity there. I think that you know, there are a lot of conservative voices out there who say that, you know, it's not art. I think that that's completely stupid. I think that that's wrong, and I think that it's undeniable that it's art and that it'll be around. I think that it's up to, you know, people like myself, it's up to writers to really give it a critical basis, to really give it its due. And it's also up to artists to make serious work that pushes those boundaries rather than, you know, tries to fit into a gallery or something like that. So I think I think there are a lot of challenges, and I think it's a really fun and really productive place to be if you want to go after that. I do think that, you know, you can face those challenges of being put into a box, of being like, oh, he just does graffiti, or oh, he just does that. But, you know, I think that everybody's going to try to put everybody else in a box at some point. So, I mean, no matter what you do, you're going to have people that are trying to do that. And ultimately, I mean, having a recognizability to your work is an asset in some way. Like, in your earlier conversation, we all know Damien Hirst's various, you know, brand and lines. We all know spot paintings, spin paintings, animals in vitrines, you know, like, in some ways that's an asset because that gives you recognizability. But, you know, you want to maintain that flexibility as an artist too. So, so I think there's a lot of potential out there.
piggybacking off that, sorry, I don't mean to monopolize the time, but just real briefly, if you could just, what are your thoughts about the long-term viability of the street art influence? You know, because there's obviously the worry of like, being the one-trick pony or being kind of put in that box and then having that box, the art world suddenly is like, that's a boring box. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, I feel like the interest in the art world's already kind of slowing down now. I don't know if it's because art in the streets is over and that was sort of the high watermark, or what. But I mean, I think that you have to look back historically and look at what happened in the 80s. Like, graffiti and street art style has been around for 20 years. Like, it's going to continue to be around for another 20 and another 20 after that. Like, I think that there's a lot of, there's a lot of naysayers out there who are just like, this is a flash in the pan, it's over. But no, it's a extremely viable art form. It's extremely, potential filled art form that can keep on going. It just needs, single innovators to really make that spark happen. And I think that that's why Banksy got so big overnight, is he got that book out, and then everybody got that book, and it was just seeing those images that showed the power of those single, pieces of art and pieces of work and moments, and that's really what set off the whole thing. So I mean, I think that there's a lot of, I think that it's totally viable. I think that, you got to go with it and make sure that you're going to push it.
Cool.
All right. Thank you too, Jason. Let's move on. Sharon Q, you had a question and now you don't. Do you have a question anymore?
Well, I was just, Abraham, you said you were interested in beauty. And could you just talk about that briefly?
Yeah, this is actually, thanks for bringing that up. This is actually something that I've been really interested in, especially since there seems to be a sort of, a resurgence in the dialogue of beauty. I think that, a lot of the artwork that we see is really reductive, is really stripped down to black and white. We have the common sort of idea of that all serious art is in black and white only. No, I think that if you go back and you look, like I walk through the halls of the Art Institute every day, and there's always this particular, aspect of something that's beautiful that strikes me every day. I think that it's, a very basic, human need in art and culture. I think what I'm particularly interested in as far as beauty goes, though, is I'm interested in a beauty that's rigorous and the beauty that is really, really intellectual and really pushes it and doesn't try to be pretty. Because I think that you can make something that's going to be pretty and that's just going to be pleasing, but it doesn't do much. And, like I go through, painting storages all the time, and the paintings that don't have, a substantial, content to them and depth to their beauty, that don't do something more, they end up in storage and they end up going out to auction. I think that, I was on the jury for Bravo's Work of Art. I was on one of the preliminary juries, and one of the guys who wanted to participate in the show, came on and he showed us his paintings, and he was pulling out all these paintings of flowers that he did, and my fellow juror and I, who's actually she's the director of the Columbia College exhibition spaces, we were both juring together, and he's like, yeah, I can sell these all day long in Indiana. Like, I just sell them and sell them and sell them, but I haven't really been able to, to push the art aspect of that. And when we were looking at these things, there were, you know, very pretty pictures of flowers, but they didn't have any real depth to them, anything else that they were trying to say with what they're doing. And I think that, you know, historically, if we look back, you know, Monet painted beautifully, but he was also doing something very interesting at that historical moment, talking about, you know, time, talking about place, talking about effects of light, bringing all that into his painting. And it wasn't just, you know, a pretty picture of a haystack on, you know, a cold day with some snow on the ground. There's a lot more going on, and you can always tell that on some level, even if you don't know what it is right away. So I think personally, I'm really glad to see beauty returning and to see things looking good. I don't think that we should deny ourselves pleasure in looking at art. I don't think that we should do that. I do think it needs to be deep. I think that if you just make something that looks good, it's, you know, it's eventually going to be, you know, sort of given the single glance, that appreciative glance, and then it's gone. But, you know, but by that same sense, I'm being fairly severe. And, you know, if that's what you want to do, like, this guy was selling paintings like nonstop and out of his gallery in Indiana. You know, he could sell paintings all day for several hundreds of dollars to, you know, he called them like paintings for the country club wives or something like that. You know, like he knew his target market and was going for it. So I think that, you know, if you want to go after beauty in one way, you can go after it in one way. I'm really interested in going after it in a very different way. So.
All right, I think we've got time for 2 more questions if we do them quickly. Let's go to Karen, and then we'll come back and end it up with Patrick. Karen, go ahead.
Hey, Abraham. I was wondering, when you either online or when you're in a gallery, do you read an artist statement? Do you wait till after you've seen the work? Do you try to avoid reading the artist statement altogether? And then maybe, sure, like, if it's really bad artist statements, does it upset you?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I've actually stopped reading them, and I've stopped reading them. I don't read them when I go in. I try not to look at, you know, any of the titles or anything. I look at everything first, and then I read it at the end. I think it goes back maybe to Joyce's question about the writing is, yeah, I mean, if you read an artist statement, you can easily tell how bad it is, you know, or the buzzwords that they're trying to hit. I mean, that's very easy to tell. It doesn't really upset me because it's happened so often at this point. I would just be, you know, crying all day long or something like that if it upset me. But yeah, that's sort of my sort of how I go about seeing things now. I also have found that I want to have my own impression first, my own, you know, sort of reaction to the artwork, and then I want to read and what I think it's about too, and then I want to go back and see what they think it's about, whether or not those two match up. And sometimes I'm like, oh, they do match up. I really wish I hadn't read that. So, because then I feel like it's, you know, like my own thoughts have been co-opted by a press release or something like that. But at the same time, I'm like, well, at least they got it right. So.
Thanks.
No problem.
Patrick, your turn.
How you doing, Abraham?
Hey, Patrick.
Hi. 2 things. Well, first thing, to harken back to your comment about beauty, I think that beauty has a power and a majesty that pretty just doesn't have. You know, when you paint something from your heart, beauty comes out. So I think that beauty has a power that pretty doesn't have. Also, my question is, what is it that you do that you enjoy the most?
That's a good one to wrap it up on. All right, Abraham, what do you do that you enjoy the most? And I'm muting Patrick because he gives us echo.
Okay, yeah. Thanks for repeating that. Can you repeat it once more, though, Paul?
Sure. What is it about your job that you enjoy the most? Where do you get your value?
Sure.
I think you just
sure,
froze.
Yeah. I mean, I enjoy talking about art the most. I enjoyed writing about that Bruce Nauman piece that I saw and trying to communicate that experience and that enjoyment to other people, maybe creating an appreciation of art. Should I be so lucky, creating an appreciation of art in them, helping them understand something that's maybe a bit esoteric, but something they might want to understand more. That's really what I enjoy. I enjoy trying to connect an artist and an artwork and a viewer all together through writing. And I mean, that's really what I try to aim for a lot of the time. You know, and then other times I'm trying to create, you know, bases for knowledge and understanding of that art, connecting that art to ideas, but always allowing people to enter into it and to appreciate art more. And that's really what motivates me, is because I think a lot of people are being told, you know, basically press release type of information about art these days, you know, like, you know, what does it look like? How much is it? Where are you going? You know, that type of thing. I don't think people are getting a lot of knowledge or a lot of, you know, ability to understand a host or to have sympathy for an art work or for an artist. So that's really what I'm interested in and try to do.
I think that's a good place to wrap this puppy up. I think you've been really provided a whole lot of information and a really clear point of view, and that you're comfortable with your point of view, and that you're forthright and honest. And I appreciate all that. I think it helps demystify the art world for all of us. I'm unmuting everybody so that they can all go, yeah. All right, everybody.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And thanks a lot.
Yeah, thanks very much. And I'm going to end this recording. Thank you.
Thank you.